Hi, I'm Selena Tisdale with the City of Midland, and I'm here today with 5 community leaders who are part of the We Hear You coalition, which is facilitating community discussions around the topics of equity and inclusion in Midland. So, by way of brief introduction, let me start with Commissioner of the 7th District and Vice Chair of the Midland County Board of Commissioners, Scott Nosen. City of Midland Mayor Maureen Donker, our City of Midland Police Chief Nicole Ford, 4th Ward Councilman Diane Brown Wilhelm, and President and CEO of the Midland Area Community Foundation, Sharon Mortensen. Thank you all for being here today. So, Councilman Brown Wilhelm, let's start with you and some background on the We Hear You coalition. Why has it been formed, and what is it that you hope to accomplish?
So Selena, I'm going to take us back a little bit because throughout history, there have been events that have changed the future of our nation as well as our communities. If we go back to the 1950s, there was a ruling for Brown versus Board of Education to desegregate schools. In the 1960s, there was the Civil Rights Act prohibiting racial discrimination in restaurants. And then if we move forward to the 1990s, we had the Hate Crime Enforcement Act, and each one of those was a tipping point. It was to say, you know what, it's time for change. So when we look at the response and the reactions to the death of George Floyd, it's another tipping point, and it's saying it's time for change. And in response to that, the city and county wanted to be proactive, reaching out to the community to say, we hear you, and we want to be on the forefront of leading that change that we need to address the issues within our community. So the city and the county supported a resolution over the summer, which allowed us to continue moving forward to work with community leaders to understand our challenges, have broad discussions with our community to understand what they're experiencing, and from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. And so Dr. Martin Luther King once said, faith is taking the first step without even seeing the whole staircase. And I think that accurately describes where we are because we've taken the first step. And we're going to keep taking those steps to ensure that in our community, it's a community where everyone thrives.
That's perfectly put. And while we watched what happened across our nation on the national level after the death of George Floyd, what we found was that not what happens on the national level isn't always what we experience here locally. And Chief Ford, you can speak better than anyone about what happens within our own local community, City of Midland Police Department, when it comes to the issues of equity and diversity. What are you experiencing in the community, and how has the Midland Police Department responded to that internally?
So certainly one of the prominent conversations during the national agendas were defunding the police. We are very fortunate here in Midland that we had already established a very strong community relationship that we're constantly striving to improve. We are equally fortunate that we have the support of city government and our elected officials, so defunding the police was never even a consideration here. However, with that being said, that does not mean as a department or as a city that we are not always looking at ways that we can do things better. I would say that the other prominent point at the national level was police reform. So there was a national movement with 8 points on it talking about things that were important for all of us to be doing. The good news is here in Midland, we were already doing the large majority of them. We are one of 29 accredited departments in the state of Michigan, which required us to do a very thorough inspection of all of our policies and procedures, and then allowed an outside assessment company to come in and confirm that we were actually doing what we were saying we were doing. We also have a reevaluation for that every 3 years, so it requires us to maintain that level of expertise. We also have a use of force committee that looks at every single incident using force by multiple members of our department to make sure that we are complying with policies and procedures. We have a policy management program that allows us to stay up to date on any legal changes and allows us to provide access to our citizens and increase transparency. So anybody that would want to could come and take a look at our policies, therefore reducing the veil of the police department. We have an early intervention system that monitors citizen complaints and officers' behavior, and we are regularly reaching out with outside organizations. Our most recent one is Bridge the Gap, which allows our department to reach out to at-risk youth and then also helps us bring minority candidates to the hiring table. So we are always striving to be the best department that we can be. We never rest on the fact that we are really good at what we do, and I couldn't be prouder.
So it's good to hear that these topics are not foreign to us. We've been dealing with them for quite a while, and it's of interest to us on the forefront. And I know Mayor Donker and Sharon, in your individual and collective roles, you have each done quite a bit of work in the area of diversity in our community and know a little bit about the history there. Mayor Donker, why don't you talk a little bit about the history of where we've come culturally as a community?
Oh, sure. I didn't know a lot about Black history until I read the work of Dr. Betty Jones, and I learned a lot from her. In Midland, in our early history, Black and mulatto individuals came to the community with the lumbering industry. When that industry closed down, those individuals left. And the real transformation of Midland from a predominantly white community to a community that values and celebrates diversity and appreciates and respects individuals of different cultures and background really started in the 1960s when our major corporations, Dow Chemical and Dow Corning, started actively recruiting African American professionals to come to our community. And these individuals, they came with their families and they stayed. And it was these individuals who they raised their families here, they gave back to local institutions, and they really began to transform our community. They were really the modern explorers, and their children, their first generation of children that really began this organic change that's been taking place in our community over this time.
That has helped to spur what's been going on at the Midland Area Community Foundation for a number of years through your Cultural Awareness Coalition.
Yes, and the Cultural Awareness Coalition, it started out as a committee, and actually it began, there was a Midland International Festival at the beginning of the 90s, and there were monies raised from that, and the folks that helped organize that said, we need ongoing work to take place in our community around diversity, equity, inclusion, although they might have used different terminology at the time. So they came to Midland Area Community Foundation, and many were very involved already, and wanted to start a fund where ongoing there could be dollars that would go to these efforts in our community. And Midland Area Community Foundation was a perfect spot for that, because really a community foundation is the foundation for the everyday person in our community. So it's meant to reflect all of our residents and their needs and desires and wishes and dreams, and to help translate that into ability to make change and transformation in our community. So they came and established this Cultural Awareness Committee. And I need to call out the two people that were really involved with that when it first started. One was Art Tiat, who was a scientist at Dow Chemical, and the other was Lynn Dorman, actually the first African-American scientist to work at Dow. So those two men said, let's get this going, and they were behind the work that started through the Cultural Awareness Coalition. And they believed that we needed to make sure all voices were heard and celebrated and listened to in our community. And they wanted cultures to be celebrated, and they organized. There used to be a downtown diversity walk that they would do, and they organized it out of that. And a lot of their initial efforts really were around how do we educate the community and make sure that they understand different cultures, that they have an appreciation for all voices, and that they recognize that. So Midland Area Community Foundation has been proud to be a part of that work from the very beginning. And really back to what we already heard, part of what we're after is making sure that all individual voices are heard and included, and that we do build a community where all voices and all individuals can thrive.
Yeah. So up to now, we've been talking quite a bit about efforts that seem to be related to mostly the core community, the core inner workings of the city of Midland. But the community of Midland is much wider than that, including the county, which is much vaster than just what we see here in this city. Commissioner Nosen, can you speak to differences, similarities that you see when it comes to issues of diversity throughout the county?
Sure. Thanks, Selena. I'll be happy to. The simple answer to your question is there isn't a lot of difference. We're all people. We all have some of the same challenges. But let me step back a little bit. I've been a county commissioner now for 6 years, starting in my 4th term. But when I first decided to run for office, I looked at the role of the county commissioner. It was pretty simple, to protect the health, safety, and welfare of all our residents in the county, citywide, countywide. So that seemed to me to align pretty well with some of the discussions we're having about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I thought it was important that we get involved in this initiative. So in addition to the resolution at the county level, the city had its own resolution as well. It seemed to me that it was important for us to get involved. There's really 3 basic reasons for doing that. Now, number one is just, I would call it alignment. Okay, align the leadership to these same issues and leveraging our resources, because we as leaders, it doesn't matter whether it's within the city or the county, these issues are pervasive. In fact, these issues really don't adhere to any kind of a municipal border. Once you cross city lines, they don't really change, okay? But another reason for getting involved is simply resources. There are some things that we can bring to the table as a county that probably help in the discussion and help in the analysis and the understanding. One example of that is our information technology group, where we've learned how to map the county very specifically into blocks, tracks, whatever. And so we can take some of these issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, systemic racism, and we can start looking and mapping and find out, are there areas of concern in the county, whether it's in the county or in the city. We've actually come a long way. I've been reminded, I was in Midland in the 90s when the KKK actually came to the steps of the county courthouse. And our leadership, city police, sheriffs, got together, and what turned out to be a peaceful demonstration. Okay, so we've come a long way. We're learning a lot. We're at a point now where I think it's important that the county get involved, and so that's what we're going to do. And we look forward to actually taking action. We've done a lot of analyzing, and we'll do some more, but it's time for action, and that's what we're prepared to do.
Yeah, and the county's efforts in this are very important, and I think it speaks to a larger issue that this is not just a band of 5 of you carrying this banner. This is a much larger group of interested folks that when these topics came to light this summer and were greatly emphasized for us, came together and said, let's do something. And I know the Midland Area Community Foundation has been a great leader in pulling together these resources, and there are many, many bodies involved with this beyond just what's here today. Sharon, can you talk to who else is part of this?
Sure, absolutely. Well, first I have to say I was really excited when Councilmember Brown Wilhelm reached out and said, would you like to be involved at the Community Foundation level? And I'm like, absolutely, yes. And we already talked about the Cultural Awareness Coalition. But if you think about, and let me just talk about a little more about the Community Foundation, because a Community Foundation, again, is meant to give voice to all. So philanthropy isn't just in the hands of a few. Community foundations are decisions about giving dollars are in the hands of our community as a whole. And so we have almost 700 funds people have set up. We have thousands of donors, and we represent all these voices in our community, which means we have to work, and we love to work with so many different organizations in our community. And that's really a part of what we do. But just to think about some of the partnerships we have, the Cultural Awareness Coalition is doing this visibility project where they're doing a series of podcasts, again, touching many organizations and individuals, telling their stories, individuals whose voices have historically not been listened to, that have maybe systematically been oppressed. We also have work that they're doing around a book club, and that was a partnership with the library where they read a book and had a discussion together. They did a Netflix viewing online together and then had a discussion about that. So again, so many things. The Neighboring Week, which really was started, I mean, it started at the city, it's grown, and that touches churches and organizations and businesses and just neighbors around our community. So again, that it's bigger what we're involved in. And then just thinking maybe a little more specifically about this, I know that Anti-Racist Midland has provided input, and they're working with the Cultural Awareness Coalition on an oral history project. Again, making sure that we document some of those stories like you were talking about, Mayor, that I know Dr. Betty Jones has done, but documenting some of those stories to be able to tell to others. So there just are variety. There's so many collaborative groups because cultural awareness represents not just the 30 individuals there, but all of their organizations. And then if we think about violence prevention, and they've worked with our Cultural Awareness Coalition, again, schools and law enforcement and nonprofits across our community. So if you start to look at all those involved, there are many, many voices at the table. And I also wanted to mention, and I know we're going to hear a little more about it, but Midland Area Community Foundation and many of our partners have worked with Saginaw Valley State University over a number of years, and they've helped our community do a needs assessment, which again involved actually hundreds of individuals from our community and many, many businesses and organizations. They helped us with health surveys. They've done 2 of those now for our community to help us talk about what are community health factors, what is going on, where do we need to continue to focus attention, where have we made improvement. So they've been a fantastic partner with our community and helping to provide data. And so of course that was something as we were having discussion about how do we make sure that we're accurately reflecting what's happening right now. We talked about the need for a partner in this work, and so we turned to Saginaw Valley State University to ask them to assist us in this.
Voices that lead to specific learning about the experiences we have as a community when it comes to inclusivity, equity, and the downside problems that we have in our community around these same topics. So I know a key focus of this group is to localize it, to not just take what's happening at the national level and say, that's our problem too, but to localize it and learn what are the problems unique to Midland. So Diane, go back and talk a little bit more about, I know some of this assessment process has already started. We're beginning to see some of those results, and the survey will be coming up as well. Tell us more about that.
So as Sharon mentioned, we've been working with Saginaw Valley State University, and they've been able to extract data that's specific to Midland County. There's 6 focus areas that we have: demographics, economics, poverty, income, government structure, police, and healthcare. And so for the last couple months, we've been really focusing on the economics, healthcare, and housing. And some of the things that we're seeing is that we do have a population in Midland County whose income is below the ALICE survival line. And what that means is, for families, they have an income where each day they're struggling to make ends meet and having to make day-to-day decisions. So then when you start looking at homeowners, you start looking at health insurance and who has it and who doesn't, you have this population that really can't afford it, but yet at the same time, they're unable to have, assistance from the government. So the question is why? And those are some of the things that we're going to be tackling as we also look into policing, government structure, and the other topics that we haven't to date, because there are a lot of questions there. And so to get more information, we are launching the Midland Racial and Ethnic Inclusion Survey. It's going to come out later this month. We're targeting the 3rd or 4th week of January. And what we're looking for there is to understand personal experiences and interactions within our community. We can always make change, but that doesn't mean it's the right change. And so without having, the personal experiences to go along with the data that we're seeing, you just can't do one without the other. And so that's why we want that portion to actually have those experiences. The survey will be available online through the city website, the county website, Midland Area Community Foundations, and other locations. It'll be open for a month. And then we'll be very interested to see, what those results are and how they compare to, what we're already seeing.
And what are the plans for once those survey results come back? What will you do with this information?
Well, first, we are going to share with the community all the information that we have, and we're going to share with them, here are the results of all the analysis and findings that we have, and here's where it appears that, we have opportunities to improve as a community. But then on top of that, we want to have more discussions so that we can really do some deep dives and ask more questions in order to, put an action plan together. One of the things we don't have today is a baseline of where we are. We say we want to be a community where everybody thrives. Well, that's one of the other key things, is to develop the baseline of where we are today so we can really track our progress against our vision. And all of that will be available, so everybody in the community will be able to, watch as we progress along and work together.
So this won't be the first or last time that we'll hear from this group, but I do want to thank you for being a part of this conversation today. Thank you for watching, and as the survey information comes out, we will be sure to share that with the community. And if you have questions or want to be a part of any of this conversation, you can contact any one of these fine community leaders that have been part of our discussion today, and we'll have information at the end of this program of where you can write in or phone in to be part of ongoing communications when it comes to the We Hear You Coalition. Thanks for watching.